Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Do come on in. Great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure to welcome you all to such a fantastic event. Got a little bit of a presentation for you this morning, talking about farming, talking about food, talking about climate change. Then we're going to have a little break, and I'm going to move to the microscope. I'm going to put some soils up close and personal so we can show you some of the things that we're talking about with regard to carbon capture, all the good bits and pieces that regenerative agriculture, climate smart farming actually delivers. Quite a few bits and pieces to get through, and I've got to start by saying this presentation comes with a health warning. There may be points during this presentation you feel a little bit nauseous or uncomfortable. There may be times where your ears begin to ring or your head begins to ache. We have actually had a couple of genuine cases of infection with enthusiasm. You're not to worry, it all wears off by the time you get home, usually. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to bounce through, I'm going to try and stand still. That's my first thing. I'm sorry, I'm a compulsive bouncer. I will try and stand still. What I want to do is talk you through a really exciting thing that happened in agriculture, third week of September. World agriculture was turned upside down by the introduction of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, Forestry, Land Use and Agriculture, Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reductions and Removals Guidance Part 2. How many of you saw it coming? Sound, well played. Absolutely revolutionary, absolutely transformative, massively empowering for agriculture, completely changes the future for everybody. Fantastic. I'm going to introduce that to you. What I want to do is start by showing you where some of the background ideas have come from and to give you a little bit of a picture with regard to some of the initiatives that are already up and running out and about. I'm going to start in Yorkshire. My introduction to a program up there, Supply Chain Consultants, Sustainable Futures and Yorkshire Water. Superb support from the Water Authority. Real issues with regard to nitrates. Nitrates in the water causing them big problems. Some of its legacy goes back to the 1970s, some of its current. And when you look at the landscape for Yorkshire, it's quite diverse. Lots of small traditional farms, lots of livestock, lots of natural and man-made ecosystems and habitats. Really diverse. But there is a problem. There's a problem with this nitrate fraction, and the problem is actually getting worse. So, Yorkshire Water, as far as I'm concerned, could have taken one of two routes. They could have gone down the regulatory framework, come at farmers in the region with a big stick and said, right, pack it in, that's enough of that. They didn't. They chose to collaborate. They actually chose to get out in the field, talk to farmers and find out what was going on and then find out whether or not they could do anything to assist. They put together a program of work called Sustainable Landscapes, and it really is all about collaboration. It's a really exciting engagement. Everything that we're talking about is demonstrated on farm, and there's masses and masses and masses of data being collected to make sure we know what we're doing is actually having a positive impact. The whole thing was focused on nitrogen in the nitrate form. Nitrate's a slippery bit of kit, really difficult to manage. This program was designed to hang on to nitrate in farm fields. We're going to hang on to nitrate, we're going to hang on to water, we're going to have an impact on flood risk and erosion, we're going to have an impact on phosphorus and phosphorus movement. So pretty soon, this initiative was quite clearly becoming a soil health program that had an impact on farming, had an impact on sustainability, had an impact on resilience, had an impact on food security, had an impact on carbon. So this program actually starts to deliver a stack of benefits for all the participating farmers that are out and about. It started with just 3 small pilot study groups around the ancient city of York. It's now being practiced on about 10% of Yorkshire arable land. Ambition is that it'll be 100% fairly soon. Really positive, really great. Couldn't happen without the farmers that are engaged with this, being driven by farmers, being funded by Yorkshire Water. Fantastic engagement piece. Just want to show you how slippery nitrogen is in the nitrate form and the scale of the problem that we've got, because it leads on to our story about climate change, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the climate. I'm going to show you a couple of graphs. One is a ploughed field, it's a clay loam soil. I want to show you how much nitrogen in the nitrate form is leaving the field over the autumn and winter months. So you're actually looking at nitrate in drainage water abandoning the farm. This is what it's doing under the plough-based system. With the plough that's then had a cover crop established on the top of it, I just want to show you what vegetative cover can do to hold on to very expensive, very precious plant food. Okay, you can see those green bars, they're showing you much less nitrogen is leaving the field. There's your safe water drinking standard. We can see that actually the cover crop's done a lot to improve water quality in the broader landscape. Yorkshire Water over the moon with that kind of thing. Big saving in terms of preventing nitrogen from leaving the field, getting into a watercourse. What would happen if we didn't plough the field? Would we actually see any difference with regard to cultivation? Well, when you look at undisturbed fallow, it's actually losing a fair chunk of nitrogen too. Not as bad, because there's not as much mineralisation going on, but it's still losing a fair chunk of plant food in the nitrate form in drainage water over the autumn and winter months. And when we direct drill cover crop, fairly simple cover crop, nothing too complicated, into that undisturbed stubble, you can see how much that vegetative cover is doing to hold on to water, hold on to plant food, give us actual real benefit to stand up and say, it's not us that are causing the problem when we get into climate smart farming. Really good to have, really positive message. Both situations, the cover crop is holding on to about 60 kilos of nitrogen that would have disappeared. The thing that's challenging a little bit more of our broader understanding is the fact that each of these fields is losing a shed load of carbon too. And in part, that's mineralisation. We've disturbed soils, we've given them a hard time, we're turning them over. We've got lots of biological activity chewing up the soil carbon fraction, and if you chew up soil carbon, you're going to release nitrogen. Where's that carbon going? Well, it should be in the ground. It should be doing us a lot of good with regard to soil structure, water and nutrient retention, building resilience and yield in our crops. It's not. It's going up into the atmosphere. And I just want to show you the bigger picture with regard to atmospheric carbon, just for a second, just so we can get our hand on the idea of soil carbon having an impact on climate change. The graph you're looking at is atmospheric CO2 over the last 800,000 years. When the levels are up a bit, around about the 280 to 300 parts per million, we have a warm, wet environment, and when it's lower, down to about the 180 mark, it's cooler. It's quite a bit cooler. And if we have a look at the last cold snap, which geologically wasn't very long ago, we can actually see that the temperatures were down, sea level was down, quite a big change in land mass. What did it look like? Well, our little corner of northwest Europe looked a wee bit like this. And you could have walked from Connemara to Vladivostok without getting your feet wet. It's really important to understand the climate is changing, the landscape is changing, it's going to impact us because we're landscape managers. Have a look at the last warm snap, which happened a long time before fossil fuels were invented. The last warm snap actually saw quite an interesting change with regard to sea level. No real change in terms of temperature. And that's really interesting because when we talk about climate change, it's temperature that changes before atmospheric CO2 does. There's about a 500 to 1,000 year lead time. Temperature change first and then CO2. And that's quite important because we're in an unpredictable environmental situation where we seem to have runaway CO2. And that means that actually CO2 is now leading the temperature cycle for the first time in geological records. Anyway, back to the story. Last warm snap. Now if you're looking at the map, you're standing in the blue bit, you've got wet feet. The tricky bit with that is that blue covers about 95% of the UK's grade 1 food producing land. So it's a significant challenge in terms of food security and farming. What's actually happened in the last little while, if you look in my lifetime, now I'm not responsible for all this, but in my lifetime, that's what the atmospheric CO2 levels have done. Okay, they've gone quite high. They're up to about 400, 420 parts per million now. And that bit there is what we would think of as man-made or anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. And there's probably enough in the atmosphere to give us a 3-degree lift in surface temperature. To put it in perspective, Every 1 degree Celsius rise would be like moving your farm 500 miles closer to the equator. We probably wouldn't pick it up because our systems in terms of temperature are not very sensitive, but your crops, your animals, your weeds, your pests and your diseases very definitely would. So there's quite a change coming in terms of agronomy with regard to any uplift in global warming. The neat bit is that we've actually got this process called global cooling, and global cooling we can play with at farm level, and I want to get onto that in a second. Okay, so if this all unfolds, and we don't know when, there's no predictive model that says it's going to happen at 2:30 on Thursday afternoon, but if it does occur the way we think it's going to occur, the landscape is going to change fundamentally. And that's quite a challenge. We're going to see significant change in cultivatable land, land where people can live. We're going to see significant changes with regard to what we can do about growing and feeding a population. Now, about 1/3 of this uplift in greenhouse gas emissions is to do with farming and food production. And until the 3rd week of September of last year, the problem was thought of as too complicated, too complex to have any form of regulation, any form of guidance or framework on at all. And then along came SBTI, and that's really, really changed the game. We know greenhouse gas emissions probably going to go up quite a bit. They'll go up, they'll continue to go up until we actually hit net zero. Now, between us, keep it a secret, net zero, that's the easy bit. The bit we've really got to get into is climate reversal, and that is essential, and it's the gift of everyone in this room to make that happen. Really empowering. Science-Based Targets has come along and said, let's have a little look at what you're up to, because we really do want you to get into this idea of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it back in the ground. It would do us a lot of good in terms of food security. It would do us a lot of good in terms of farming and farm resilience. And there's a lot at stake. Nearly half the world's gross domestic product is very much at risk if we don't get this sorted. Okay, so it's not a few elite, it's not a few poor that are going to suffer. This is global. And the really neat bit about it is Science-Based Targets Initiative is based on an old New Zealand program which was called He Waka Eke Noa, which is Maori for we are all in this together. No one is being penalised, and if we all do our bit, we will give our children a fantastic future. How quickly can we do it? I just want to show you that little bit more with regard to the technical. We can do this really, really quickly. That straight line on the CO2 I've just shown you, it isn't a straight line. Never has been a straight line. It's quite a complicated little bit of kit. What we've actually got is emissions, our emissions, pushing CO2 levels up, but we've got the planet drawing CO2 back down. And because as farmers and food producers, we are influencing the biggest bit of that, soil and crop, with regard to atmospheric CO2, we get this fantastic seesaw-shaped graph occurring month by month, going up and going down with regard to atmospherics. The trend is upwards. The trend is upwards because our emissions are just a little bit bigger than the drawdown the planet can get into. The drawdown is all about soil carbon, it's all about oceans, it's all about vegetative cover. The emissions are all about not just fossil fuels, but what we're doing with regard to once we've generated something clever, are we recycling it? Are we looking after the resources that we've got? Where are we actually losing our greenhouse gases back into the broader environment? I just want to show you how quickly the planet can cool down, because there are a lot of naysayers, there are a lot of politicians, there are a lot of academics that tell you this can't be done. I want to show you what the planet is telling us can be done. This is data from NASA looking at atmospheric CO2 month by month. The more red there is in the image, the more CO2 there is. So you can see we're moving upwards, January, February, March, we're into April, get to May, we're about peak, so emissions are really roaring. We've not really got the drawdown going. Then our crops kick in, we stop cultivating, soil start drawing in carbon. Look how quickly the planet cools down. You're seeing a 6 part per million reduction in atmospheric CO2 in 60 days. That is phenomenal. And the planet is telling you, if you play with me, I can get you out of this. And I think we can do it so fast the planet actually won't treat us badly for causing the problem in the first place. The real neat bit about it is there's not a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of what we're actually playing with. There's almost as much tied up in vegetation and photosynthesis as there is floating around in the atmosphere. The real power, and that's why probably most of you are here today at this event, the real power is soil carbon. There's a huge amount more carbon in the ground than there is in the atmosphere. The tricky bit is, and we've got the geological evidence to show it, when the carbon goes from soil to atmosphere, the planet warms up. And when we get carbon going from the atmosphere, going back into the ground, the planet cools down. Environment Agency estimate this is the amount of carbon that agricultural soils have lost in this last probably 80 years. It's a big chunk. If we took that chunk through our cover cropping and our cultivations and all the clever bits you'll learn about today, if we took that chunk out of the atmosphere and put it back in the ground, it would be like turning the climate change clock back by half a century. That is the gift you have got to give. I think that is phenomenal. And we can do it through food. We can do it through drink. And I want to show you a little bit more as to how that's going to happen. A little bit on the soil side. Soils go through transition, and this is what they look like when they've got good carbon, loads of biological activity. I'm going to put some soils under the microscope in a moment, and we'll see some of this up close and personal, hopefully. When we burn the carbon, soils lose structure, they lose integrity, they lose biological activity, they lose the ability to retain water and retain nutrients, and that gives us a hard time. From a farming perspective, we need to actually treat the crops with a little bit more in terms of steel, diesel, fertilizer, crop protection, as our carbon levels fall down. What the plant's actually showing us, what the soil's actually showing us, is that it's short of carbon. And the carbon in that image there, you can see little boxes. Box A, that's a little bit of clay, that little wafer. And box A is showing you a tiny bit of organic that's stuck to it thanks to microbes. The top bit looks a little bit like an elastic or a little bit like a plastic sheet. That's humus, handmade for you by microbes in the soil, chewing up chunky bits of organic matter, processing them into one of the most magic ingredients on the planet. It's stabilizing the soil particulate material. It's a food source and a habitat for all our beneficial microbes. The microbes are doing a great job feeding and protecting the plants we grow. More importantly, though, they're creating one of the biggest bits in that picture, and that's the hole in the middle. 95% of the plants that you grow are air and water. Less than 5% of the crops we produce are mineral nutrition. The air and the water is coming out of that hole in the middle, and the size of that hole is vital if we're going to get good drainage and aeration, good gaseous exchange, good carbon capture, good crop performance. So we're looking at a managed situation biologically below ground on our behalf by the microbes if we give them a little bit of carbon. What do soils look like when they're calling out for carbon? Well, we could point the finger at the 1930s and say, cool, they did it really, really badly out in Texas, 1930s. This is Arizona a couple of years ago. This is what the soil looks like when it's running out of carbon. It blows about. Here's one from China that was so big, it actually crossed the Pacific Ocean and dropped Chinese soil on California. And this happens so regularly now, it doesn't even feature in national news. When was the last time you saw a dust storm hit BBC? No? Nobody? It's happening a lot. And it's causing all sorts of issues with regard to warming up oceans, transferring viruses around the world, doing all sorts of bits and pieces that we really don't want it to do. You're looking at the lifeblood of agriculture, the cornerstone of food security, literally blowing in the wind. Now, the UK, wind blow is not really our number one problem. Our problem really is water. And not even as abrupt as you're looking at there. Not these big erosion events, little bits of water moving through soils just a wee bit too quickly. And here's an image of the UK after a 10 mil rain event. You can see, bless you, all the major river systems pumping the lifeblood of agriculture into the marine environment. That's really, really bad news, really bad news. From the UK's perspective, we're losing around about 3 tons of top quality soil per person per year. It's not as bad as the rest of the world, still a little bit of an issue with regard to food security, because one of the things that we have seen, and this is the second bit of the story, one of the bits that we have seen, and we're all aware of, is that there are more and more people on the planet. There's more and more demand for food, there's more and more demand for calories, and I just want to show you that one so we get a little bit of context. We've got the atmospheric bit, I want to show you the demand for food bit, because that's the bit we need to address. Again, in my lifetime, and I'm not responsible for this, this is the increase in population on the planet. It's gone from about 3,000 million to about 8,000 million. Big increase, seriously big increase. When we look at actually what's going on, there was a tipping point. 1979 saw the population exceed the sustainable carrying capacity of the planet. Anybody born after 1979 is now more and more reliant on agriculture for its food, and agriculture is more and more reliant on artificial fertilizers to deliver that. Roughly half the food on the planet is now only available because we use synthetic N. Real challenge, that synthetic N is 75% of the carbon footprint of most crops. So we can't just stop using N to save the planet with regard to CO2, because we'd have to then decide which half of the planet wasn't going to get the food that it needed. And we don't feed everybody terribly well as it is. Okay, so population has gone up. Let's say it's doubled, a little bit more than doubled. When we look at the calories being consumed, we're actually eating more per person. So population's up maybe by a factor of 2. Food requirement is up by a factor of 3. We actually need a lot more calories with regard to making sure everybody gets their basic levels. Now, farming's done such a fantastic job that we've seen significant changes in productivity. When I first came along, we were feeding just over 2 people per planted hectare. We're now feeding almost 6. And that is technology, that is innovation, that is good stuff and bad, delivering some really clever, sustainable and not so sustainable advances in food production. What it does mean is that the global agricultural system is actually producing enough in terms of calories to feed 9,000 million people. So we know we can keep everybody fed. The difficulty is that's just calories. And the calories won't do it necessarily with regard to health and well-being. And that's the next bit I want to take a little bit of a look at. Okay, so an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Good old phrase. Well, maybe it used to. If you look at the mineral concentrations of apples and how they've changed in the last 100 years or so, you can see a significant downturn in vitamins and minerals. Minerals I'm just showing you here on the board with regard to composition of something simple like an apple. Now the tricky bit is, because you're all wide awake and you're all agronomy tuned and you're all really pumped up on this Regen Ag program, you're looking at that and going, hang on a minute, if we're producing stuff that's low in magnesium, that stuff isn't going to be very healthy, is it? It's not going to be very good at handling water. It's not going to be very good at handling fertilizer, bless you, nitrogen. It's not going to be very good at delivering us health and fitness in the plant, so it's going to actually give us a hard time with regard to delivering health and well-being in the people that eat it. So there's an agronomic story here, and there's a human health story here, and there's a planet health story here, and they're all related. The big driver for me with regard to what's going on here is that we've known for a long time. 1935, there was a technical statement read out to Congress in America. It's no longer possible for the foods that we grow to sustain human health and well-being because their mineral composition is too low and the digestive system of the human being is simply not big enough. And as a result, we're adapting. This is me before my modeling career. What you're seeing here is a physiological change to ever decreasing mineral composition. The lower that nutrient density becomes, the more food we've got to take on board to extract the little bits we are desperate for health and well-being. Means we've got to change. We either change to adapt to the situation or we go back to actually farming in a little bit more of a nutrient-dense way. Okay, what are we going to do about it? What sort of implications has that got? Let me show you the implication it's got with regard to one of the health metrics you may be aware of, body mass index. I'm just going to draw it for the UK, a little study we did a couple of years ago. Here are the various categories. You've got your healthy, you've got your overweight, you've got your obese, and then there's a little bit further on. 1950, just after rationing, most of the population absolutely bang on in that healthy lot. 1980, we're into the first little bits of the fast food revolution. By 2020, we're seeing significant issues with regard to one of the big things here, food-related disorders. It's a massive, massive challenge. With regard to, okay, so what? Well, the NHS is spending a big chunk of money on this. When we did the study, about £15,000 million a year was being spent on food-related disorders. That's a lot. It's 5 times the UK budget on agricultural support. And it's being produced at a level that is on the wrong side of the problem. If we put a little bit of effort into the actual prevention of the problem, i.e. building that nutrient density by changing our soils, changing our cropping, a lot of this is going to disappear. So there's a huge win for the Exchequer by retargeting some of that funding. If we look at the American situation, there's only 6 times the population in America, but there's a significant increase in spend on this exact same issue. And to put it into context, these are the monthly death figures, bless you. These are the monthly death figures for obesity and COVID. We shut down the entire planet and we ruined the global economy for generations to come for a very virulent flu-like virus. And in actual fact, what we should have done is put a padlock on the fridge. If you look at the damage that's being done, there's a lot of issue with regard to the poor quality of food that people are being exposed to. Now, there are other issues with regard to that. We can look at things like iodine imbalance and chromium requirements for better carbohydrate metabolism, but essentially, we're producing really, really poor quality food. And my issue is this pursuit of the cheap food mantra has corrupted farming, it's corrupted soils, it's corrupted the planet, and it's not doing us any good at all. Okay, so what else could it do? There are lots of nutrient-related issues that we can track back to an unhappy soil. Here are just a handful. And all of them have a mineral component that, because you're all related to agriculture, you're going to pick up and say, if that mineral, magnesium, selenium, zinc, if that mineral is low in the food that we eat, it's causing us a problem agronomically. It's causing us increased cost of production, it's causing us increased disease pressure, it's causing us issues with regard to crop performance, livestock performance. So why not treat it at farm level? Because it would have a positive impact on the health and well-being of the planet. Okay, so somebody asked the question, what would happen if we actually put those minerals back into the food? What would happen if we actually raised the mineral content of the foods that we eat to match the lowest level recommended daily allowance vitamins and minerals? I'm going to say that again because sometimes people don't pick that up. We lift the nutrient status of food to the lowest level. This isn't optimum nutrition, this isn't sports people, this isn't actual Olympians, this is just getting us to the lowest bar we could possibly set. What impact would it have on a population's health? Fabulous question. Massive is the answer. When we look at the individual diseases and disorders, I'm just going to throw up a handful of them here for you. The food that we eat has a massive impact on how happy we are. So these are the disease levels with the ordinary diet. If we increase to the lowest level, the blue bars, purple bars are showing you the changes in health and well-being simply through eating a little bit more vitamin and mineral. Each one of those vitamins and minerals tells a story. Now I know it's not politically correct to get gendery, but these nutrients have a gender bias. Your magnesium and your B group is very, very definitely for the non-male gender. It is very, very definitely irritability, hormone balance, nerve impulse transmission, anxiety, depression, ability to do what you need to do on the female side. On the male side, the zinc and the selenium absolutely driving everything that keeps the non-female physiology calm and compliant. Massive, massive benefit for all of us, simply by tweaking little bits of mineral nutrition. When this study was done in America, they estimated 500,000 lives were being needlessly lost through eating the wrong kind of diet. That's a lot of suffering and a lot of cost. Now, what I'm not saying is the problems of the planet would be fixed by having an extra 500,000 Americans. What I am saying is, if you, hey, don't get racist. What I am saying is, you imagine from a personal point of view the damage that is being done through everything that we do in terms of food and drink. And the really, really terrifying bit is you choose what you eat, you choose what you spend your money on, you choose to invest or not invest in climate smart farming techniques that save the planet and give your youngsters a fighting chance at a big, brave future. That's your choice. What we've got to do is make sure that choice is informed and targeted. And that's the next bit of the story. Okay, so let's pick on something a little bit more familiar. Let's look at wheat. It's not all about how we grow it. Sometimes it's about how we process it. I just want to show you what happens when we take whole grain and we knock the stuffing out of it to produce refined white flour. There's lots of bits and pieces that go missing in this. We really need to understand the benefit of each one of these vitamins and minerals with regard to our health and well-being, because they are absolutely crucial. Not just to me, I'm an old guy, I've nearly finished my time here, but to the youngsters. They're looking at an impoverished future because what they eat doesn't give them what they need, and that's a real shame. So the driver, can we fix it at farm level? Can we do something about it that would improve farm profitability, sustainability, biodiversity, and cool the planet down, and make our youngsters fit and healthy? The answer is yes, very definitely. And the Science Based Targets Initiative has come out with a massive framework to empower everybody in this room to make it happen. Absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to draw you a picture as to how it's working. I'm going to build you a little supply chain, and I want to show you how Science-Based Targets is actually coming into this idea of food and drink actually rescuing the planet. Here we are at farm level, we're growing wheat, we're doing our best to keep our yield and our quality up, we're doing our best to keep our carbon footprint down. We're going to pass it on to somebody, merchant, miller, it's going to get turned into flour. Hopefully it's going to go into something really special, but it may not. Idea is that if we can get the protein, selenium level, zinc level right, it's going to go into something special that we would all identify with as being, for at least half the planet, a staple part of our nutrition. The big bit about it is, when we look at this overall process, let's just track the carbon for a second. If we take 100% of what's known as the global warming potential at farm level, by the time that grain is passed on to the guys that turn it into flour, the way we farm accounts for about 90% of the carbon footprint. By the time it's processed into bread, the way we farm accounts for about half the carbon footprint of that loaf, as it sits on a supermarket shelf at point of sale, or it sits on a kitchen table ready to be eaten. That gives us as farmers a really big reach. What we do at farm level is actually transferred all the way to the kitchen table. And that's quite alarming, but it's also very empowering when you start to understand what we can do about it. Science-Based Targets has come along, it's given us a roadmap, it's given us a pathway to keep the planet down to a temperature lift of 1.5 degrees, and it says everybody on that pathway needs to be reducing their emissions by 50% by 2030. Right, quick show of hands, how many of you know what your carbon footprint is? Wow. Well done to everybody, a round of applause to everybody that does know. To everybody that doesn't know, it's something that we do need to talk about. I will talk you through it in a second. It's an easy thing to do. It's a number you need to know. Please don't be afraid of doing it. The minute you've got it, you will give yourself a pat on the back because your numbers are far, far lower than the media would lead you to believe. You are really on track for doing good stuff, but you need your numbers to demonstrate it. I've been on the carbon journey a very, very long time. It's one of the reasons why I stand before you today disguised as a much older man. It is one of the most boring topics on the planet. Vital, but dead boring and really difficult to demonstrate. You've got to do it through numbers. It's not like growing a cover crop and seeing fantastic purple out there because your phacelia is smothered in bees. Carbon is really dull and really grey and really, really not exciting at all. As a result, unfortunately, it's all a numbers game. The neat bit about it is that when we start to play a numbers game, we can stop talking about cost and start talking about value. Now, usually at this point in the presentation, I have a little bit of audience participation. I turn to the audience and I say, what do you think to that? And the audience shouts back, show me the money. I'm going to do that for you this time around because the tent's a little bit hot and I wouldn't want to put you under any pressure. Let's show you the money. Let's have a little look at the reach. Let's have a look at this idea. Can we turn the cost argument into a value argument? If I take 1,000 kilos, a ton of the grain I produce, I can actually turn it into 2,800 gram loaves of wholemeal bread. They'd have a carbon footprint of about a kilo of CO2 per loaf. And if I had to then get that to net zero by buying carbon off the European trading platform at this point in time, it would add somewhere between 3 and 7 pence to the loaf of bread. Now bear in mind, the price of bread's gone up by about 25 to 30% in the last 12 months, and not a single fraction of that uplift in value or cost has translated itself into environmental benefit. That's just covered various bits and pieces in terms of scarcity, either of fuels or of feedstocks. What we're looking to do is to say, okay, if we do the reductions and we do the removals that we see in SBTI, firstly, the farm bit's got to be dealt with. We've got to take care of the bit that's ours, no two ways about it. The neat bit about it is, because we're all he waka eke noa, the entire support platform that we lean on is going to actually deliver some real benefits. Yara, for example, other fertilizer manufacturers are available. Yara have the intent as of next year to be introducing zero carbon fertilizers for farmers. That's a really, really significant change. They're doing it by taking Yorkshire wind farm energy, piping it across the North Sea, plugging into Norsk Hydro's hydroelectrics, and pulling nitrogen out of fresh air using renewable energy. What a transformation. It means that a big bit of the carbon footprint that we're all afraid of is going to disappear. That's fantastic. Okay, we can actually look at what we can do and we can say, okay, if we take care of our bit of the carbon footprint and we've got enough that we can certify in terms of the removals, can we actually demonstrate that we can lend that carbon, give that carbon to the rest of the supply chain and get them out of jail? The answer is yes. It's achievable, it's being done with really high integrity, and it's being done right now. And the neat bit about it is then, it totally repositions agriculture. And this is so refreshing. We're no longer at the far end, the lonely end, the dangerous end of a supply chain. We are now right center ground in the fight for everything that needs fighting for. Every component in the supply chain is still important, but we are now center ground, not the end of that supply chain. And what it means is, when the SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative, actually comes out and gets on with it, we're all on a pathway. And the reductions bit, that's our driving force. We've all got to reduce our emissions. The bit that's going to keep us all together is this removals bit. Now that's brand new. That only came out third week of September. If we can certify it, if we can actually generate really good integrity behind that removals capability, every one of the players on that pathway that's involved from soil to supermarket hits all the targets they require. And this isn't greenwash. This is absolute save the planet, do it now, and get paid for it. That's really, really exciting. And only people that can make that happen are sitting right here in this room. That is your gift to give. The exciting bit, the really exciting bit, is actually quite easy to do. What we need to look at the reduction side of things, we need to look at the removal side of things, and that means we've got to get a little bit of information. We've got to do your carbon footprint, and we've got to measure some soil carbon fraction. Okay, so The carbon footprint bit, I'm going to bounce through this one. I'm going to do it really quickly because it is boring. To do a carbon footprint, you need your crop records. You take a little bit of information about the energy that you use, the cultivations that you get into, the fertilizers that you get together. You draw a little pie chart and you say, okay, where are the big bits? 75% of that pie chart is nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, so if Yara come along, other fertilizer manufacturers are available. Anybody comes along with a better bit of kit, a biological nitrogen that pulls out of fresh air, gets into nitrogen sequestration, a clover-rich cover crop that gives you residual, and introduced grain legume to take the pressure off soy in your rotation, anything you can do to make your nitrogen use efficiency better is going to lower your carbon footprint. The neat bit is that makes you more sustainable and it makes you more profitable at the same time. So you walk away a winner. So if climate change turns out to be a Chinese hoax, as some people would say it is, everybody that engages with SBTI actually walks away with real benefit because we've improved soil, we've improved food, we've improved health and well-being. And it's all about playing with this pie. And I'm just going to show you some tiny little bits as to how we can get the numbers down. Now, we're at a Regen Ag show, so I'm going to be very, very polite about Regen Ag. I'm not here on a recruitment drive for the no-till Taliban. I don't mind what cultivations you use. The background to it is when we start to look at what we can do, every farm is different, every field is different, and you're going to tweak your system based on what you're happy to do or not happy to do. You may or may not want to include organic manures, composts, diastates and biochar into your management system. That's great for building soils. You might want to go headlong down the precision ag route and look at what you can do with regard to fine-tuning your inputs. You might want to go buy a big shiny bit of kit, but a little bit like having a conversation with my sat-nav, I wouldn't start from here. Get your soils in order first, see how they change, and then decide what bit of kit might be appropriate for you moving forward. All sorts of support platforms out there for us to play with, all sorts of incentives and schemes and grant aid that we can engage with. And that would be farm investment, and that would be driving everything forward from the farm's point of view. All sorts of reasons why you might want to go direct drilling. Could be fuel saving. You could probably justify the cost of a £500,000 spend on a big drill and a big tractor on a 1,000-acre farm simply in the fuel savings compared to ploughing over a 5 or a 10-year period. So you might do it because it makes economic sense. Might do it because you want to actually slow down the amount of carbon your soil is losing. So there's all sorts of reasons for doing that. One of the reasons behind putting a little bit more effort into the technical, the deep dive on this, is that you may be pressured to reduce your inputs. You may think that the only way to reduce your carbon footprint is to reduce the amount of nitrogen or reduce the amount of fungicide that you apply. And I would put a huge warning on that. Please know what you're doing before you start reducing your inputs. Let me illustrate the story. So here's some farm data from us. This is looking at nitrogen response with and without fungicides. And you can see as we increase our nitrogen, we increase our yield. That's our treated yield. And here's our untreated yield curve. So same levels of nitrogen going in. The situation from a farm's point of view, this is where we're comfortable in terms of nitrogen. And this is our yield with regard to farm best practice. If we reduce our fungicides by 50%, which is what the Sustainable Pesticides Directive is asking us to do by 2030, we drop down the yield curve. Yes, very definitely, our carbon footprint per hectare comes down. Not by much, but it does. The tricky bit is because we've now got less yield, we've got fewer tons to put that carbon footprint over, and our carbon footprint per ton has actually gone up. Our nitrogen use efficiency has actually gone down. So we've done totally the wrong thing. Sounded logical? Let's cut all these high carbon inputs. Actually, what we've done is we've given the supply chain a massive, massive headache. Okay, there's a bit more to this story that often gets ignored. Assuming supply chains want to be sustainable and resilient, and assuming everybody on the planet wants to be fed, somebody's got to grow the bit of food that we are no longer growing because we've reduced our fungicide practice in accordance with the European Sustainable Pesticides Directive. And that means that we've got to account for what's known as the displaced carbon that someone else is generating to fill the food gap that we've just created. And now our carbon footprint per ton has gone up significantly. Okay, it might have sounded like a good idea, let's reduce inputs. Please be careful and know where you're going when you do. One of the big things to actually de-risk reducing your inputs, genetics. Let's get into a little bit tougher in terms of the varieties that we grow. Let's breed them with a little bit more disease resistance and environmental tolerance, and that significantly de-risks your reduction policy. And again, you walk away a winner. There's a lot of good stuff coming out of that. But the story is, good farming keeps your carbon footprint low. So don't be afraid of doing your carbon numbers. You're probably well on track already. So that's just selecting. What about procurement? How many of you know the carbon footprint of the fertilizers that you buy? Let me show you how important it is to find out. And if you don't know, ask your supplier, what is the carbon footprint of the ammonium nitrate I got this year? Let me show you what happens when you get nitrogen, this is ammonium nitrate, from different parts of the world. Okay, so this is one from a Baltic state, this is one from a European state, this is one from, nearly Scandinavia, and this is a Scandinavian one. This is carbon footprint per hectare, simply based on procurement. You haven't bought a no-till drill, you haven't bought a bigger tractor, you haven't gone into cover cropping. You've simply asked the question of the guy that produces the fertilizer on your doorstep, what's going on? SBTI comes along and says, you know what, that one that's got the big carbon footprint, it's now got to be net zero. And the net zero charge on that one would be about £360 per tonne of ammonium nitrate. It's not a cheap input anymore. And that, as a mechanism, is going to apply to absolutely everything. Imported beef, tradable wheat, anything that we want to play with, soy, anything you want to play with, now under SBTI is going to have this balancing tariff with regard to carbon, which means that you are very, very much empowered to do the right thing, and you're very much protected in terms of what you think of as everybody else not playing. So if the Chinese want to send us a really cheap ammonium nitrate, but it's got a high carbon footprint, that carbon footprint means that actually it isn't the cheap option. We never had that as a mechanism before. Okay, what else could we get into? We could grow our own nitrogen, and I love this. This is one of my favorites. Grow it yourself. Empower these little guys here with regard to the ability to pull nitrogen out of fresh air. It's a really, really difficult thing to do. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. Actually, what you're looking at is a biological infection in a host plant, but it is magnificent. Where we were, 1979, this is barley under sowing, a permanent crop of white clover. That white clover is delivering about 140 kilos of N. It's delivering a really high quality yield, and it's delivering at zero input. I came across this as a technique way back in the 70s, introduced to a fantastic little Japanese plant pathologist by the name of Masanobu Fukioka, and he was doing this in rice, and I'm going to come back to rice. It's going to be my finishing flourish is rice. I just want to give you a little bit of a pointer on that one. Fantastic job. What else could we get into? We could do all sorts of clever bits and pieces. We could build our rotation with regard to lower input, higher quality food stocks like rye. Absolutely phenomenal for people, pigs and poultry. We need to be thinking about creating space and rotation for our grain legumes to take the pressure off imported soy for our livestock sector, because I don't believe we're going to flourish without a livestock sector, and I'm not signed up to the let's cull the dairy herd mentality. We could be getting into cover cropping, intercropping, functional field margins. I want to bounce through 2 quick slides and I want to get to the final little bit. Okay, cover cropping. For those that don't know what it is, cover cropping, growing a team of plants that won't compete with your agricultural crop in the space between harvesting one crop and planting another. Could be the autumn, could be the spring, could be actually at the same time as you're growing something. And I want to plough you back to, sorry, I used the P word, I apologise. I want to take you back to the Yorkshire programme we started on slide 1 and just give you a little bit of an information about how powerful these things are. So the cover crops, biodiversity, above ground, flowering, pollinators, all the good stuff. Below ground, building soil, making soils work, feeding the biology that gives us all the good stuff, prevents things like erosion and runoff from tramlines in winter wheat. Winter wheat is going to take a real pounding if we don't sort it out. 30% of all soil loss in the UK is coming from tramlines in winter wheat. It's causing a big issue with regard to water quality, soil quality. We've got to get it fixed. Cover cropping would help to a greater extent, but we need to be actually thinking about the longer term impact on that one. And this is where Yorkshire Water's programme came back in, because Yorkshire Water funded cover crops going out to farms within that initial pilot programme we talked about on slide 1. The important bit is lots of farmers in the initial pilots hadn't grown them before. Really good to see the engagement, really good to see the healthy skepticism, really good for people to actually try, to look at what other farmers were doing, find out what worked, find out what didn't work, and Yorkshire Water kept funding it. Yorkshire Water kept saying, here's the seed, let's get growing, because we think it's doing some good. But we need some numbers. We need to know it's doing some good. So here's a 4-year study showing you above ground biomass relative to nitrogen on this Yorkshire Water programme. And you can see as the farmers get hold of this, they do a better and better job. They really embrace the idea, they really get to grips with it, and they're doing a massive amount to actually prevent nitrogen leaving the field and getting into watercourses. On average, they're retaining about 130 kilos of nitrogen in a 90-day period in the autumn. That's phenomenal progress. Now, one of the big things we want to know is how much good is that doing to the soil? And we will do a little bit of soil testing, and I'm going to introduce a little bit more with regard to the technical bit of soil testing, just for a second, because the carbon bit's really important. So here's a field, here's a biomass map of a cover crop. All those little dots, they're going to be where we're going to take our soil samples from. Now, in the old days, pre the 3rd week of September of last year, in the old days, you'd have been forgiven, possibly, for taking a little bit of soil out of each one of those dots, putting them in a bucket, stirring them up, taking a handful of that, sending it to the lab and saying, can you measure that for organic matter, please? So you've got your field, you've got your sample, you've followed your instructions, and you've got one number for soil carbon or soil organic matter from that field. That might be all right if you want to do a little bit of pH testing. It's definitely not all right if you want to do high integrity carbon monitoring. Carbon monitoring is being driven by statistics, and that means every single one of those little dots needs its own measurement for organic carbon, for fine dry bulk density, in order to calculate organic carbon stock. It's a really complex thing to do. Why is it a complex thing to do? Because we're looking for tiny, tiny changes. If the whole of UK agriculture was running at 2% soil organic carbon, and then went regen ag for 5 years and cover cropped at every opportunity and never ploughed again, that 2% would likely go up to 2.1 in 5 to 10 years. And that tiny, tiny increase would be a phenomenal success. But it's right on the edge of our detection capability in the lab. So we might miss it completely. We might be able to say, you've not done a thing. And if we get to the point where anybody can look at us and go, you haven't done a thing, you're not going to get paid for your carbon. You're not going to get valued for all this drawdown. You're not going to get rewarded for improving soil health because we haven't been able to measure it properly. So what do? We team up with some really, really clever people with some really clever bits of kit, and they're here today. These guys are doing soil core work. It is GPS, georeferenced. It means that we can go back to very similar points in the field time after time, and we can look at how soils change. It's really important that we get this idea. We've got to have high integrity data if we want high integrity carbon. If you want me to dip my hand in my pocket and give you some of my hard-earned money because you're telling me you've done a better job, you need to be able to demonstrate capability. That's what this team actually allows us to do. It allows us to fractionate the soil. It allows us to look at the bits that matter. It allows us to measure lots of other things that maybe will matter in time but don't matter at the moment. And it means that we can look at the entire soil profile and look at all the good bits, the sand, the silt, the clay, the carbon. We can look at how that changes. And I just want to show you a data set for a high integrity carbon certification program. This is what it looks like. If you want statistical robustness, one sample won't do. We need lots and lots of samples, and every single one of those dots, we can separate them out, every single one of those dots has got to move upwards. And we've got to know it moves upwards. So one homogeneous randomized sample simply won't do. And a huge round of applause to AgriCarbon and the Sustainable Futures Carbon Bank for putting the program together that is leading the charge on high integrity carbon for agriculture, not just in the UK but elsewhere. Really important. Okay, so final two slides. How do we make it happen? Why do we make it happen? And what are we going to see as a result? I'm going to run through this one. We've got our background bits. We need to do some carbon numbers. We can do that with last year's crop record. That is not a problem at all. It's really simple to do. Once we've got that, we can actually get onto baselining for our production emissions. The minute we've got that, we can look at where do we need to go for carbon reductions, and we can look at the big bits that create a challenge for us. And often that is going to be our focus on nitrogen management. Anything we can do to improve nitrogen management is going to reduce our carbon footprint. And that's really exciting because that's all under our control. It means we write our own roadmap. It means we can actually get that mile marker, 50% reduction by 2030 we've got to hit. And that's there for us. We've got 5 years, maybe a little bit more, to actually deliver on that one. The neat bit is once we've really squeezed the pips on reduction, we can play with this little bit here. We get into the removals. We measure soil carbon change. We look at all the good bits about reduced cultivation and cover cropping, straw incorporation, biochar, biological nitrogen. The list is endless. What does it do to improve soil carbon? And if we can measure and demonstrate that soil carbon change, we put the second string to the bow. And that is high integrity, nature-based carbon, which means that this is very definitely a net zero ambition that has teeth, it has reward, and it has real value. Okay, my final slide. Thank you for your patience. So what? Why would we bother doing all this? Well, I want to show you what would happen if we decarbonised with regard to impact on an everyday activity like riding a bicycle. And you're all sitting there thinking, this guy's a nutter. Bicycles are zero carbon transport, aren't they? They haven't got a fuel source. Why are we looking at cycling? I want to show you an everyday activity, riding a bicycle. Where does the carbon come from? There's carbon in the bicycle. There's carbon in the energy source that powers the bicycle. There's carbon from us because we respire a little bit more. You're thinking he's not got this right. He's completely off track. What's that got to do with soil? What's that got to do with anything? Well, the energy that is powering my young friend here is food. And the food burn in terms of carbon influences your carbon footprint for every activity you do. Absolutely everything. What I want to say is, look, if you want your heart to beat, you've got to put some fuel in the biological fuel tank. Let's actually fill that fuel tank up with some different foods, and let's see what happens as a result of that. Okay, so as these foods are filling up, here's a question for you. Which one of those food groups would give you the biggest carbon footprint? Which one of those food groups would give you the smallest carbon footprint? Based on everything you know, you're a highly, highly educated audience. You're here for a reason. You know all about this. Which ones are you going to pick? Let me help you. Here are your headline figures for carbon contents, kilo of CO2 per kilo of food. You might be forgiven, but not by me, for thinking that the big number means you should avoid that food group. Let me show you the issue. The issue is calories. The issue is food quality. Let's draw the picture. Okay, so let's chart it out. In terms of the carbon per kilometre travelled by our young friend here, same amount of carbon in the bicycle, almost the same amount of carbon in our respiration, almost. The big bit is food. What does it take from the food side of things. It's really important to understand the food you eat impacts on the planet, because you choose what you eat. You choose what you put in your mouth. You choose what you spend your hard-earned cash on in terms of food. Let's put it in perspective. These are the carbon footprints of a bus, a train, a car, and an aircraft. If that bicycle is powered by an organic, out-of-season, specialist tomato, I'm generating a carbon footprint 3 times greater than if I took a private jet to a supermarket. It's your choice as to whether you engage with that or not. I'm not saying don't eat tomatoes. I'm saying use your intellect to inform your decision to buy the right thing. If you look at rice, in its raw form, rice is 50 times more damaging for the planet than potatoes. If you look at rice powering a bicycle, and there are hundreds of millions of rice-powered bicycles on the planet, they are actually generating a carbon footprint per kilometre similar to a small family car. And it doesn't matter whether that car is diesel, petrol, electric, hybrid or hydrogen, because the embodied carbon in that car is pretty much the same, at least for probably the first 60 to 80,000 kilometres of driving. 1 hectare of rice generates more methane than 3 dairy cows. Okay, we have a real media storm about shouldn't eat beef, don't want cows. Where's the media storm about rice? Is a bit scary, isn't it? The really neat bit about it is when you understand the problem, we can decarbonise a cow just as fast as we can decarbonise rice, just as fast as we can decarbonise anything else. SBTI, Science Based Targets Initiative, says we can all play with the same thing, and it's fantastic. Every single one of those food groups will be zero fairly soon. It will be halfway to zero by 2030. So the planet's going to get cooler and it's going to get better. Last little bit, just to put it in perspective, just to frame it with regard to who's what and where. Again, a little bit of a poke at the media. Aviation or agriculture, which one's got the biggest carbon footprint? Interesting silence. Okay, aviation, real pressure. Aviation is spending billions on new airframes, new engines and synthetic fuels. Agriculture, we haven't really started yet. Our footprint's quite a bit bigger. The neat bit about it is that actually this has been taken out of our hands. SBTI has come along and said the people that are going to drive this, purely voluntary, the people that are going to drive this are the people that operate these things. Because every one of the major retailers has signed up to SBTI, it means that everything that goes in that shopping trolley has to be SBTI compliant. And that has created an absolute storm of panic through supply chains that use agricultural feedstocks, because nobody really knows what farmers do or what their carbon footprint is or whether or not they can decarbonise. It's a really exciting time. And that's where initiatives like you've seen for the Sustainable Landscapes, the Future Food Solutions Programme, Sustainable Futures Carbon Bank, they're stepping into that melee and saying, we know how to talk to farmers because we are farmers. We know how to handle soil because we understand soil. We know how to deal with supply chains because we understand supply chains. We can give you what you're looking for. Now, we're not going to do it on our own, and we're not going to do it without changing behaviour. There's almost as much carbon in the food we throw away as there is in aviation. So we've all got to play our part. But when we do, really exciting time, the planet is going to get much, much happier. Science-based targets allow us to do it. That's the framework. That's giving us the power and the teeth to make it happen. And then the question I posed at the beginning of the presentation, can we really eat our way to a cleaner, greener, brighter future? Resounding yes, absolutely. And that is all your gift to give. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. Okay, well, welcome back. Part 2. I'm going to have to apologise because I'm not looking at what you're looking at. It is a bit of a soil safari. We are going to disappear down a couple of soil profiles in a little bit of detail. I won't keep you long. By the time it gets to about 1:25, can somebody shout, shut up and bugger off? And that's for me, not for you. I'm going to have a look at a few bits and pieces. Unfortunately, the soils are quite dry, so there's not a lot of creepy crawly activity, so there's not anything really big and scary that's going to pop out of here. Because ordinarily, when you see it on the big screen, it does look a bit frightening. So I need you all, keep your arms inside the tent at all times. If you see anything frightening, please try not to scream. We did have, sitting on the front row, I'm not making any eye contact. One of the last times I did this, I had 3 really big burly rugby players, and a spider introduced itself, and on the big screen it looked big. I've never seen people move to an exit faster. So please don't worry. If there's anything frightening that you do see, I will deal with it. In all seriousness, I'm going to move the microscope through the soil profile. If anybody starts to feel disoriented or dizzy, say something and I'll slow down, because you can. I'm really sorry, when the image moves, you might go, I don't like this. And what I don't want to do is send you home thinking soils are terrifying. I need you all engaging with this one. So what I'm going to do, I've got a few soil samples here to have a little look at. I'm going to talk you through what I can see. I want to show you some of the really, really fun bits that I can pick up. Ordinarily, I work with a worm called Kevin. Kevin has his own wrangler, and unfortunately the wrangler is part of RADA, and his contract won't allow him to operate out of Yorkshire. I haven't brought Kevin with me today, and I haven't been able to find a replacement. I'm really sorry, because the highlight of the show is to put Kevin on the platform in front of you, and you can see Kevin make new soil. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that today. I'm really, really sorry. I was hoping I could. But I am going to show you bacteria and biology. I am going to show you the power of plants in structuring soils. I am going to show you a little bit with regard to how farming influences the positivity that we build in our food and drinks through soil health. The healthier the soil is, the healthier the food we grow, the drinks we consume will be, and the benefit to us and our youngsters is massive. Okay, so first things first, what are we going to do? We're going to look a little bit at the green stuff, because the happiness of the green stuff is going to tell us all about whether or not the plant is communicating with the microbes. So, green stuff, and I'm going to get you directions wrong. On this hand side, there's a leaf going straight. I can't see what you're seeing. That big leaf that's now moved to the center of the screen. That big leaf. I'll get onto it. That one there. There. Okay, so that big leaf, that's a cereal leaf. And what you're looking at there are lines of veins and little bits of chlorophyll between them. Now, can you see you've got some dark bits and some pale bits? There, you've got some pale stripes going down the leaf and some dark bits going down the leaf. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that's what plants are supposed to look like. That image is so ingrained in our understanding of plants that Walt Disney puts that into all his animation. Anybody with youngsters that have watched the Tinkerbell series will know that every single plant leaf has got stripy bits on it. Those stripy bits, that is magnesium deficiency. Now, the first bit of the presentation, I showed you foods that were low in magnesium having a real impact on health and well-being. The plant is telling you it's shy of magnesium. Now, for the farmers and agronomists in the room, every 1 bit of magnesium that plant is missing, it's missing 4 bits of nitrogen and 22 bits of water. So that plant's already saying, I'm not a happy little thing, and you're going to throw huge amounts of stuff at me and expect me to be big and yield well and not cost you much and deliver some real environmental benefit. Plant's already telling us, no, I'm not happy. Magnesium's a really important one, because there may be plenty in the soil. When the soil goes dry, air temperatures go up above about 24 degrees, magnesium stops working. So you have to intervene. That's what farming's all about, intervene. Okay, so plants already telling us a little bit shy in magnesium. That means it's not catching as much sunlight as it should, which means it's not putting as much carbon as it should below ground. That's important, because this plant, this is a cereal plant, about 2/3 of its carbon capture is going into the ground, and it's going into the ground specifically. I'm going to move now, hold on to your seats. We're going to move down through the profile here. We're going to get to the first stages of root, and I'm going to have to just wiggle it about there. Okay. What you're looking at now is a root system that's surrounded, covered by soil. Technically, we know that as the rhizosphere. It's about 1 to 1.5% of the total soil, and it's glued to that root because that root is pushing carbon and amino acids deliberately out into the soil to feed beneficial bacteria that are living in very, very close association with that root. The neat bit about it is that the bacteria, they really enjoy that. So they get really happy. They do a little dance. They dance, they tickle that root. And when you get to my age, when you're tickled, you laugh a bit, you leak a bit. So the plant gets tickled, it laughs, it leaks a little bit more sugar and amino acid back into the root system. The root system then supercharges with bacteria. It's a deliberate thing. It's not done by accident. It's a deliberate thing. The important bit about it is that those bacteria are really, really good at freeing up, harvesting and transporting nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients. You're looking at the factory and the delivery system for a lot of important bits the plant requires. If your soils have been hammered from cultivation, if they're low in carbon, if your biological diversity is not where it needs to be, this sort of thing doesn't happen. And you say, well, that's no big deal, because what I'll do is I'll use 0.24, 24 and a little bit more AN, and I'll supercharge the plant without touching the soil. And you can. There's no two ways about it. You can. The driver from the climate smart point of view is, let's get the soil to do this for us. Let's work with the plant. Let's make sure that that biological activity is occurring. Now, where we've got plants like winter wheat growing in a late autumn and they're not very happy, this kind of thing is really, really slow to develop. Where we've got this occurring in the same time condition but under a cover crop, which has got root structure, I'm going to show you in a minute, that's going to depth, it means your soils are better structured, they're retaining more in terms of available water and available nutrition, and they're actually looking to grow. These microbes are also very defensive. They say, look, this is my mum, she feeds me, I need to make sure she's taken care of. So the minute the soil moisture deficit starts to get a little bit serious, these little chaps produce some very, very clever molecules that say to mum plant, watch your water, make sure you can keep turbid, make sure you keep everything. Hey, what was that? Make sure you get things going. I'm going to ignore it. It'll clear off in a minute. And what they do is they actually supercharge the plant to be more resistant, more resilient to drought, and they do it on purpose. If they get dry, if they run out of food, what they then do is they go into a dormant stage, and what they say is, we don't want to become food for anybody else. So we produce some really, really strong antibiotic materials that actually keep that root system safe and secure. Really, really powerful. Some of you might actually be buying some of this stuff. If you're potato growers, you might be buying a product called Serenade. Serenade effectively is bacteria that live in the roots that manufacture some very, very strong chemicals that have actually been registered as biological fungicides. Work really well, happens naturally. So when farmers tell you, I can feel the soil getting better because I'm a Regen Ag climate smart farmer, and I think my crops are healthier, they're on the right track. Because the more you build the biological bit in the soil, the better the plant will interact with not just the broader environment, but also with regard to the bits that want to eat it and the bits that want to keep it safe. If I were farming and I didn't have this going, where would I be looking? One of the materials that closely mimics plant root exudate is molasses. And one of the materials that allows plants to secrete more exudate is seaweed. So you've got some really interesting little bits and pieces you can build into your agronomic process, whether or not you're a small-scale tomato window box grower or a broadacre farmer, that encourage this process to occur. Don't necessarily need to introduce a probiotic bacteria into the soil, but we have a long history of doing it. Frederick Bayer introduced the concept in 1842, and I don't mean 6:45 at night. It was a long time ago. He put a spore-forming bacteria known as Bacillus aminoliquefaciens FZB142 as a seed treatment on small grain cereals. Was getting massive, massive yield responses, and it fought take-all. Biological. all about priming the whole thing from the soil's point of view. And the plant will do a lot to make that happen. Let's go a little bit deeper. There's a couple of more things I want to show you in here, and I'm sorry I'm one-handed. Right. Soil that's not happy. Root that's not happy. Okay, that is a little bit of clover root. Can you see the nodules on it? I'm busy pointing at this screen here, and of course you can't see what I'm looking at. And I'd put it, yeah, sorry, I'm a bit stupid on that one. The root's coming down through the field of vision. It's got little lumpy bits on it. Those little lumpy bits are nodules. They're actually an infection. They're a bacteroid that is living in close association with the root. Mum plant has gone, you know what, I don't like this. I'm going to isolate you because I'm not entirely sure what you're doing. But the bacteria is saying, if I can steal a little bit of carbon from you, I can actually give you a huge amount of nitrogen. And nitrogen, as we heard in the last presentation, that is all about carbon footprint. So if we can actually grow biological nitrogen, whether that's free-living bacteria or cover crop legumes or clovers as a bycrop, we're going to win. We're really going to win this particular challenge. Two things I would say. Look to the soil adjacent to that root. It's a big lump. It's not many holes in it. Okay, that's not biologically active soil. That is unhappy soil. We know it's unhappy soil because it's got no space in it. I'm going to show you happy soil in a minute. Look at the root. Happy root, unhappy root. It is very definitely unhappy. How do we know? It hasn't got any soil stuck to it. Okay, so immediately the plant's telling you, I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do, but I'm not very happy. Final bit, look at the little nodules on that root. What color are they? Can you see that they're white? They should be pink. What they're showing you is that clover plant is deficient in cobalt. Cobalt for all of us, B12, really important. Cobalt for this little guy here, all about nitrogen fixation. One of the big things I've got with academic research is, look out, here he comes again. One of the big problems I've got with academic research is that when we try and do this on a small plot replicated scale, we have to take care of so many confounding variables. It's really easy to miss things. That would be a big miss. You do a 3-year study with that clover alongside spring wheat and say it didn't have any impact on my wheat crop at all. And I'd look at that clover and I'd say, well, of course it didn't, because it's not working properly. And one of the big things we've got to do is learn how to talk to the plant, because talking to the plant will allow us to understand what's going on. What should this guy be doing? We should have big pink nodules on that root, and that little guy there potentially drawing down 140 to 180 kilos of atmospheric nitrogen per hectare per annum. That's a real benefit to the following crop, or a crop that's growing alongside it. Right now, what's this guy doing? About 12. Really disappointing. Could be picked up really quickly with a little bit of help. Now, the thing that's not helping it is the soil right beside it. The microbes in that root are trying to pull nitrogen out of the air that's in the soil. There isn't a lot of air in that soil, so it's working really hard on next to nothing. The other problem is that fixing nitrogen out of the atmosphere is incredibly energy hungry. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of phosphorus, takes a lot of magnesium. We've already shown magnesium deficiency. We know we're not high in phosphorus. How do we know we're not high in phosphorus? Because there's no soil stuck to the root. Most of the phosphorus of the plant is coming from the biological sources in that rhizosphere. Those roots are clean, which means that that plant's not very happy. If I can just draw it this way, I'll show you happy root on the cereal as the reminder, coming across here. There. Okay, so that's root covered in soil. That's what it should look like. The bacteria in there are supercharging that plant with phosphorus, manganese, magnesium, zinc, selenium. Nutrients that would be really, really difficult for the plant to pull out of the soil, and really, really difficult for a farmer to apply. Even with the best technology, there actually is. So the roots are very happy. In that one, they're not happy in the next one. What makes them more happy? I'm going to show you. Is that the right tense? More happy. Let me see if I can show you this one. Let's drop you down a rabbit hole. If I can pick that one up. Sorry, I'm too many hands. Bless you. Let me just lock that off. Right, what you're looking at there is a wormhole. What you're looking at there, if I can just change the field of focus a touch without blowing it up. It's going to fight me a bit, I'm sorry. I'm going to show you the little bit of soil around the edge first. I haven't quite got that. We've gone down the rabbit hole too far. There. No, not quite. Let me move it slightly that way. So the background to it is, can you see, that's it. There's a little bit more crumb structure in that soil there. So it's holding together, but there's gaps in it. That crumb structure there is sand, silt and clay glued together by bacteria and fungi. Okay, that's doing a really, really good job. The bacteria and the fungi are actually being secreted by the earthworm, but they're also, if Colin was to come out of there now, Colin would be covered in a very clear gel-like substance called mucilage. And that actually is a really good bacterial feeder. Why is it a good bacterial feeder? Because Colin is a bacterial harvester. Colin is looking to process huge amounts of soil to lift the bacteria out of them in order to get the protein that Colin is looking for. As a result, they build and structure these wonderful, wonderful earthworm galleries. Now, if I can just run the risk of blowing it all up again, what I want to do is just to drop you into that hole a little bit more, because I want to show you that you're actually looking at little grains of sand there. And what I want to do is show you a touch more, that's gone that way, a touch more down that, that's it. So what you're looking at there is the small bits of sand, silt and clay actually glued together biologically. The roots are working on that one. We've got all the good bits and pieces occurring with regard to the bacteria and the fungi. But Colin's drain hole is air and water movement. That is infiltration. That is taking rainwater, putting it in ground to depth to save for a rainy day. Water and nutrients tend to be held in 3 reservoirs. A really, really tough reservoir that is totally inaccessible to plants. A reservoir that is so quick to fill and empty that you've got 24 hours to feed or drink and then it's gone. And a reservoir that is really, really plant available. The tricky bit is to make sure that we've got that balance about right. What the earthworm is doing is it's actually doing all that for us. Now what I want to show you is a little bit more detail on that one. I'm going to change samples. Apologies, you're going to get a white screen. It's not the Microsoft white screen of death just yet, but I just want to show you this one here. I need more arms. There's never a genetically modified technician about when you need one. Right, now let me just, there. This is the beast. Okay, very, very different root structure here. This is a broadleaf rather than the grass. What I want to do is show you, if I can find it, there we go. If you look at the root structure on that one, you've got a single taproot that's going down to depth with enough pressure to crack concrete. You've got side branching. That's all about has it got enough manganese, has it got enough phosphorus. And I'm just going to take a little bit of a looky down here, because what I want to show you, there's our biologically active soil. This is what's being structured by our earthworm, and I'm just going to slide across here and give you a little bit more on the root side of things. If I can just focus on that, just tight against the cable now. Just focus on that for a second. I'm looking very carefully at the tiny, tiny bit of, can you see, plant residue that's fitting in there. So you've got fine active root, you've got root that's actually busy doing what root needs to do, and I'm going to, there he is, so that is a little bit of old crop residue, and I'm going to try and pull the field of focus. No, this is one of the downsides of an autofocus sensor, is that it decides to do what it wants to do, not what you want it to do. Okay, so there's the root of the main plant, and that, what it's going into, which is there, and I just want to move you. What's causing me a problem on that? There. So you can see the root now working through old crop residue. Okay, I'm going to cheat. I'm actually going to pull it this way. If somebody wouldn't mind, that would be fantastic. I'm going to disappear down this rabbit hole. That's very kind. I should have asked for an assistant, shouldn't I? And what's your name and where do you come from?
Maggie, North Knots.
Oh, thank you, North Knots. Well played. Okay, so North Knots, can you see that? All that fantastic root that's going through there, and those little root hairs that are going acrossways, that's where the engine for nutrient uptake is coming across. They're really sensitive. What they're actually doing is they're chasing old crop residue. Can you see how that's now disappearing into that little bit on that top left-hand side of what looks like oilseed rape stubble? Could be oil radish from a cover crop. It's going that way because, and I'm really hoping I can do this, this is going to be the ta-da moment if I can get it. Oh, we're nearly there. It's actually chasing a wormhole, and we've got it. That's it. So right in the center, thank you so much. Right in the center, that is, excuse me, children, fingers in your ears, this is earthworm poo. This is really, really viable, very, very valuable soil. This is earthworm eating that soil, processing all the bacteria from it, chewing up that organic carbon, leaving you with air, water, minerals, biological activity, fantastic stuff. It's also, if I can nudge it just a touch, can you see there's a little bit of a color change? On the far right hand side there's a brighter orange streak on the edge of that earthworm gallery. That's subsoil, and that's subsoil that is iron rich, and that actually, as an iron rich subsoil, is going to give you an absolute nightmare of a time with phosphorus and manganese. Earthworm says, not a problem, I'm going to bring it up here, sort it all out, add some carbon to it, make it very, very happy. Last point, and I know I'm over time, last point is, if you don't disturb the soil, those earthworm galleries are handed down from generation to generation to generation. Some of these earthworm galleries in Regen Ag are 25 and 30 years old, and they are motorways from metre or more below ground up to the surface, chimneys that dry your soil, warm your soil, give your soils biological and nutritional and all the good stuff, enrichment, and pull carbon out of the atmosphere to cool the planet, to bless you, to give our future a much, much brighter start. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate your help. Thank you very much. Thank you and good night.